Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Big Brother Canada 11 following week 4. And this was definitely an interesting week in terms of what's being set up for the future. We definitely had some interesting new developments take place, and it'll be interesting to break down. Now, before I get started, I should acknowledge the errors that I made in last week's rankings, as I made those before the episodes were released, and I based all my information off the Digital Dailies and the information I got from the RHAP updates that we got from those. But it turns out that the Digital Dailies were not giving us a full picture of what was happening in the house, and I just wanted to briefly acknowledge that. I think the biggest thing to note is the fact that I had said in last week's video that Vanessa had won safety from Canada, and that this caused Koozie to back out of her plan of putting Vanessa up on the block. However, it now turns out that Jonathan had won safety from Canada. Koozie did go through with putting Vanessa up on the block, but then Vanessa ended up pulling herself from the game due to medical reasons, which then caused Hope to become the new nominee. And as if that wasn't bad enough, we didn't get any new digital dailies between Monday and Thursday of that week. Now, granted, now it makes more sense why we didn't get anything from inside the house, given, well, Zach self-evicted. He even tried to get Ty to self-evict as well, but it was still a series of events that left us largely in the dark over this past week, and I feel like it highlights some of the limitations of this new format of providing digital dailies in lieu of live feeds. Now, granted, I think we probably would have been cut out anyway due to the sheer magnitude of what was happening and the way production was handling it, but it still led to last week's video having some inaccurate information, so I just want to acknowledge that. But with that all out of the way, we have 13 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 13, we have the first person to leave the game from this week, but here we have Vanessa, who did initially go up on the block as part of Koozie's plan until she had to leave the game due to medical reasons. Now, granted, even if it weren't for that, she still would have been in a rocky spot coming into the week, as despite her being the pawn, we definitely knew that Zach and Ty were going to fight to get Vanessa evicted from the house, and in turn, it's just a pretty suboptimal move for Koozie to be making in the first place. But even outside that, I just don't think Vanessa played that good of a game. She was very confrontational. She was very rarely included in the majority alliance at any point, and I feel like she was just dangling around for a lot of the game. So there isn't too much to praise about her game, although I also understand that there may be some stuff going on that obviously led her to leave the game, and I hope that she's doing well. But for the fact that she didn't play that good of a game, that leaves her here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have the other person to lead the game for this week, but here we have Zach, who ultimately chose to self-evict, although to be fair, he probably would have been voted out anyway, given he pretty much turned the entire house against him. And really, I think Zach played a pretty messy game. Now you do have to give him credit for controlling those first 2 weeks in the house, even if she was making some pretty suboptimal moves like targeting JM and then later Rob, two people who wanted to work with him in the future, all while micromanaging people, making people feel like that he was just controlling them. And it got to the point where he was just too far out in front. And not to mention this whole last second ploy of trying to get Hope DQ'd due to the whole letter situation, which was just pretty ridiculous. But it still highlights Zach's character in a lot of ways. The fact that he even chose to self-evict in the first place and try to get Ty to do the same just makes him seem more like a sore loser. And in general, the fact that Koozie chose to target him, even though he would have been perfect for her game, as he would have been this clear target to keep a lot of the women in the house unified, just showed how much he got on their nerves by the end of it. But still, the fact that he controlled those first 2 weeks, that makes me think that he's a somewhat effective player, but he has pretty messy reads, and at the end of the day, he just overplayed, which is why he is here at number 12. And with that, there are 11 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win based on their current game position. But at number 11, we have the person that is the most likely to leave on Thursday night, but here we have Dan Zabo. And what is there to say about Dan? He was pretty much on the outs for the entire game, and I feel like he never did much to really get himself out the bottom. And with Santina, someone who is also at the bottom, choosing to target him, like despite her having his secret HOH and having a perfect opportunity to make a bigger shot, just goes to show that Dan doesn't really have anyone in the game. And it's a shame too, because he seems like an okay enough guy, but at the end of the day, there's just not much to his game, which is why he is here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we actually have the current HOH, but here we have Santina, who did win this secret HOH, And she obviously chooses to target Dan for whatever reason, despite it not really benefiting her game. And I feel like Santina hasn't really improved much from this past week, where despite Zach leaving the game, like she doesn't really have anyone at this point. And plus, she's pretty much going to be the target by a decent chunk of the house in the next week, where I feel like it's probably going to be either her or Ty going home next week. And this isn't helped either by the fact that people see her and Renee as a duo, which only further puts a target on her back in the future. I think the one thing going for Santina right now is the fact that Jonathan and Hope are going to target Ty over her next week. However, even then, they're not even doing that much to protect Santina. They're just pretty much going to try to win comps and keep her safe that way, while not really doing much to include her in any of their alliances. So I feel like Santina is someone who is pretty poorly positioned, and it would not shock me if she were on the block next week as the consensus target, which is why she's here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we have another player that I could see being put on the block next week. But here we have Ty. And again, I don't think Ty's a very good player. He doesn't seem like a very likable player. And he burned a lot of bridges this past week through him and Zach trying to get Hope DQ'd. And we even saw Zach try to get Ty to self evict, which is pretty ridiculous. And even this past week, we saw Ty threaten to quit himself if he were put on the block. Now, obviously, that didn't happen, and plus, Daniel did ultimately use the veto on Ty, which you had to give him a little bit of credit for, that Daniel would want to do that for him, despite that not necessarily being in his best interest. However, I still feel like Ty is in quite a bit of danger in the future, to where if Jonathan or Hope win the HOH, I can very well see them going for Ty next week, as they would want Ty gone over Santina. And also, I think the thing that puts Ty over Santina, aside from fewer people targeting him, is that he's at least being included in some alliances. Like, he's still kind of with Claudia, and he's kind of in this alliance with the Shady Bunch, although even then, I could see them aligning more with Jonathan and Hope in the future over Ty, assuming this whole war doesn't completely blow up. I think there's still some inroads for Ty, but I still feel like the way he played this past week was still pretty bad to where he is here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have a player that I am still relatively low on, but here we have Hope. And Hope probably has no shot of winning at this point. I just can't imagine him getting to the end and having the respect to win, as even though he's in the majority alliance at this point, which is a big reason he's even above Ty and Santina, we even see people like Daniel and Jonathan getting frustrated with him, and they feel like that he just shares too much information to where they feel like they can't trust him too much. And plus, a lot of the stuff that he's gotten involved with has not really done much to make him be seen as a serious contender. Like, obviously, the whole, like, him wanting to quit early on, that's not great. Him, like, wanting to win the veto in order to win competitions, like, that's, like, not good either. Although, to be fair, like, with the information we have now, it's not as bad as I claimed it to be last week, but still not great. And even now, like, I feel like while he's in this alliance, I feel like he doesn't really have much pull within that alliance. And I feel like he's the most expendable person within that, to where if the others decide that he's just too much or that he's just not worth it, I could see them easily cutting him. And plus, their whole concern if he gets to the end is another massive red flag as well. And even with the whole letter situation, like, while like we see like a lot of the house sympathize with him over that, I feel like that doesn't exactly help his case either. The fact that he like felt so compelled to like bring in this letter from home just to like have like a connection there, I feel like none of this bodes well to Holt's perception in the future, which is a big reason I have him at the bottom of these people in the majority alliance right now. But it's still the fact that he's still less likely to be targeted over Ty or Santina that leaves him here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and I think had I recorded this video a couple days earlier, I would have had this person a little bit higher, although at this point I do have to drop them. But here we have Renee. And Renee's position has oddly dropped in recent days, where I would have said coming into the week that she was in a solid position with being in the girly pops, although even then I feel like she was probably the least effective player within that. And even once the week started, we saw her like have this like debate with Claudia over like how to play the middle and whether to include Ty into their future plans. However, we see Renee even get her way there to a degree. But then now we're seeing this like conflict break over with Renee and Claudia, to where now people, for whatever reason, think that Renee and Santina are a duo. And that's not good there. I mean, I feel like that makes it more likely that Renee could just be put up as a pawn next week if Santina is the target, which is not good there. And I feel like in the future, like especially now that we're seeing this new power structure form, I feel like the girly pops are being sort of like a thing of the past. And I think Renee is probably the least likely to benefit from this shift in the future, where I feel like Renee doesn't have too many connections that she can cling on to in the future. And then obviously with this new alliance, like the Crown, and even the alliance that we'll be getting to more in a moment, I feel like Renee is just kind of let out of all this. Now, granted, I think she has a bit more longevity than obviously Santina, possibly even a tie, but I think Renee is someone that could easily be cut in the coming weeks if like we're seeing the shift in their favor, or even if like the targets like Santina or Ty win power, I could just easily see Renee being cut here. But still, I think she's a bit more secure than those people we already talked about, which is why she is here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we actually have another girly pop, but here we have Shenaya. And I don't know what to make of Shenaya either. Now, she is losing Dan this week, which I think is pretty bad for her game, as Dan was one of her closer allies. However, I feel like that's still kind of a pro in that it could allow her to adapt and potentially shift her game. Now, similar to Renee, I think Shenaya is still kind of out in the wilderness. I feel like she is a bit under the radar. However, I feel like I have more confidence in Shenaya to rebound compared to Renee. And plus, I feel like she's less likely to be put up on the block next week compared to Renee either, which was enough to leave her here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we actually have the other girly pop and the person I had at number 1 of last week's ranking, but here we have Claudia. And I think Claudia has misplayed this week, where again, while I did put her at number 1 last week, I feel like that was largely due to her seeming to be in the best position in the house, where with Zach going out, I felt like that would have handed a lot of the power to the girly pots versus the shady bunch. And she also had Ty as well, who she could pull in as well. However, I feel like the way she has played the middle has been pretty suboptimal, to where she has clearly latched herself too closely to Ty, to where people are seeing her now as more closely aligned with Ty than to them. And it even led to her being put up on the block as the replacement nom after the veto's used on Ty. Now, granted, she's not going home, but I still think it reflects that Claudia's position in the house has diminished. And I did consider putting her a bit lower as well. However, we are seeing her still be included in some new alliances, like especially now that the girly pots have faded to a degree. I feel like she is sort of included now with the Shady Bunch and with the Jonathan and Hopes to a degree, to where I feel like she could bounce back, but I feel like this was still a downgrade to where she was last week. And I feel like in general, she has misplayed her hand here, which is a big reason I have her here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this was a weird placement, as I feel like this person is currently in a better position than Claudia or Shenaya. However, I feel like they also have the potential to go down in the future, and I feel like there's still some red flags there. However, at number 4, I did decide to go with Jonathan, the highest ranked member outside the new Shady Bunch group. And the main reason I have Jonathan as high is that I feel like he is better positioned within the crown compared to these other players. And I feel like he has been included more in these more recent developments in the game. However, there are still some knocks to his game. I mean, for one, the fact that he seemed pretty receptive to Daniel using the veto on Ty is pretty bad, as obviously Ty staying around is not good for his game. And yes, while he would target Santina next week over Ty if he were to win HOH, I feel like he's not really doing enough to keep Santina well positioned to ensure that other people don't take the shot at Santina if they were to win power instead. And I feel like in general, that passivity could really come back to bite him if Santina were to go and then Ty were to stick around. I feel like that would severely weaken his position within the game. So there's still plenty of knocks at Jonathan's game, and I did debate putting him below these other people. However, the reason I'm having this high right now is that we know that he's in a better position than those other people. And yes, while there are all these pitfalls that can lead to his game crumbling down the road, I feel like until we actually see that, I feel comfortable leaving him higher than Claudia or Shenaya, which is a big reason I have him here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and if you haven't guessed already, it is the 3 members of the middle group, now known as the Shady Bunch, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But at number 3, I did decide to go with Anika, and the main reason I did is I feel like Anika is someone who definitely will be in it for a while at this point, and as I said earlier, I think she is someone that is learning the game as she goes. But with that said, I still feel like she's the least likely of these three to actually win the game if she were to get to the end. Now we know that she currently has a final two deal with Daniel, which is pretty good there. However, I'm not sure if she's going to win that right now. Now, it's a bit too soon to know for sure. However, I feel like Daniel is currently playing more actively than her. Now, she is picking up the game, and I could very well see her overtaking Daniel or even Koozie in the future. However, I feel like based on the evidence we have right now, I feel like Anika is the person I had the least confidence in actually winning. And while I acknowledge that she is improving as a player, I feel like I'd need to see more to truly put her in top contention, which is a big reason she is here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and I did debate these next two. However, at number 2, I did decide to go with Daniel. And Daniel is in an interesting spot right now where I feel like he is probably the best positioned person in the house right now, as no one's going for him and he has plenty of connections. He's obviously within the Shady Bunch, but he also has good relationships with Jonathan and Hope. He has a good enough relationship with Ty, at least based on him deciding to use the veto on Ty, which is something that should be used to build good favor with Ty to where he doesn't target him. And I feel like in general, people aren't seeing Daniel as that big of a threat, and I think he's managing that somewhat well. Now, there are still things you can call out, like the fact that he does ultimately use the veto on Ty, someone who is this big target, is a bit questionable. And the fact that he told Jonathan and Hope this, two people that should be very anti Ty and should be very against this plan, yes, they are receptive to it, but realistically, like, I feel like Daniel didn't do that much to make them receptive to it. I feel like it more so reflects Jonathan and Hope's like shortcomings as players. And then you also have like him building a final two deal with Anika, which is pretty good. And he is starting to recognize that Koozie should be taken out sooner rather than later. But there's also questions about whether he is setting up the groundwork to eventually take that shot or if he's going to wait too long. I feel like there is certainly a debate to put Daniel in number 1 based on his current position. However, I feel like there's enough questionable stuff that he has done as a player to where I did decide to leave him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother Canada 11 right now is Koozie. And I did debate between her and Daniel. However, I did decide to go with Koozie because I feel like I have more faith in Koozie as a player right now. Now, granted, she's not the most game body player in the world, where she did decide to target Zach despite that not being in her best interest. However, we did see her later turn that into her advantage, where after she takes out Zach, she's able to build this new alliance where she's able to take her Shady Bunch and branch out to Jonathan and Hope, while also building an alliance with Ty and Claudia. So I feel like, despite my concerns with this move at the time, I feel like she has worked it out pretty well. And I feel like in general, I feel like Koozie has made fewer mistakes in the game compared to Daniel, which is a big reason I have her above him. Now, I will acknowledge that Daniel is still probably in a better position than Koozie, and I could see a world where Koozie eventually becomes this big threat that is taken out. However, I feel like Daniel is someone that I have more issues with the way that they've been playing the game, particularly with the whole tie and veto situation. But I feel like Koozie is still someone that's played a pretty effective game up to this point, which is a big reason I have her here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. Now, I am probably going to stick with Thursdays now in the future for these Big bbcan updates, especially now that Australian Survivor is done, so stay tuned for that. I'm currently covering Survivor 44 and doing weekly power rankings of that, so stay tuned for that as well. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.